All right, that's it for housekeeping. Let's go ahead and get started. My name is Pierre Tessier. I'm the Director of Solution Architects here at Honeycomb. Wonderful place to be. I'm joined with two very, some of my favorite people in the whole world, Liz Fong-Jones, Principal Developer Advocate at Honeycomb, and Fred Hebert, a Site Reliable Engineer here at Honeycomb. If you don't already follow these people on Twitter, you need to go to Twitter right now, type in these aliases and click the follow button. Two of the best people I've seen in this industry, full of knowledge, and I'm so happy to be joined with them. If you two each want to say hi while we're waiting here.
Sure. Hi, I'm Liz, and I'm really excited to continue this journey of educating people about SLOs. I started this journey many years ago when I was an SRE at Google, and it turns out a lot of these things are really applicable regardless of which tooling you're using.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Fred. Pierre, kudos for the perfect Quebecois pronunciation to my name. I'm a site reliability engineer. I've been here for a bit more than a year now, and I've been one of the people who fiddles with a lot of the SLOs that we have here.
Awesome. Well, with that being said, let's talk about what it means and what we're talking about when it comes to SLOs. And the first topic I want to kind of discuss here is everybody asks this, and before we even get started in the SLO journey, before you can even know how to respond to them, you got to know what to measure. And we get asked this a lot, right? What do I measure when we're doing SLOs? And I think a great topic we talk about is something we say, and it makes sense for others, is you need to measure based on the service type itself. Liz, this is content that you've shared with me before, but it's not just looking at availability, because not everything is a request response. Sometimes I got to do a pipeline.
It's this
right?
thing where we introduce the subject in an introductory level based off of request response services, but like all the time I get asked, like, how do I measure SLOs on my Kafka pipeline? How do I measure SLOs on my RabbitMQ pipeline? How do I think about SLOs for my batch processing system, which is sending out invoices, right? Like, those are things that are not necessarily as amenable to thinking about just properties like, did it succeed? Was it fast enough? But we also have to think about properties like, if you have a request that is executing and like sending out all of these forms or whatever, you can't necessarily think about it as all of it succeeds or none of it succeeds, right? Instead, you have to think about, out of all of the invoices pending to be sent out, what percentage of them have been sent out in the past 24 hours, right? Like, that becomes a much more relevant concern. So while today we're going to be talking more about kind of request response cases, I want you to know that I'm thinking about you, and there are ways to adapt this, even if your service is not request response.
Even ourselves here at Honeycomb, we don't just do request response. We're kind of a big data platform, if you want to think about it, right? We take everybody's telemetry data, we process it, and we also have to store it. So all these things actually, they matter to us, and we care about them as well here at Honeycomb. And we do have SLOs on data processing time. And we look at it in terms of latency as well. So it's called latency per event inside of Honeycomb. How long did it take us to process your data coming in on ingest? So definitely something we see a lot here at Honeycomb. Fred, I know you love to talk about the durability of something we call Retriever, which is responsible for our query engine and our storage within Honeycomb. And maybe we could talk more about Retriever later on, but any SLOs, particularly for you, that come out here when we think about not just the request response routine or the request response side of the world?
We have some interesting ones around how triggers are implemented and how SLOs themselves are implemented. And a lot of them, for example, the idea of a trigger is that these are all these things that should be running every minute. And we have this concept of the total capacity to process all the permitted triggers, for example, is that the moment more than a given percentage of them takes over a minute to run, then we know we're going to start compounding and having like this pile-on effect that's just going to happen. And so for these, we have an SLO that has to do with how long it takes to process the entire batch and whether we're able to eventually catch up and stuff like that. So, for us, it doesn't necessarily have to do on that specific one, on durability, the correctness, the freshness, or anything like that. It's really about for us to think that the service is healthy, we need to have the extra capacity to keep doing that work. And this is the thing that we're monitoring with it in this specific case and measuring with that SLO. And we have different ones for different types of things. But for specific types of capacity, we just define whatever we think is worth having and caring about.
And that is kind of something really important, right? Something having worth caring that we should keep around, which is probably going to be a great segue into this next one. Working on the customer side of the world, interacting with customers and prospects all day on wanting to use Honeycomb. This is the number one question I get when it comes to using SLOs. How many SLOs do I need? Right? And it's every SRE at any company. Oh my goodness, we always get asked this one. How many SLOs do I need? Liz, how many SLOs should we have?
We at Honeycomb probably have 24. Fred is the keeper of the SLOs. But we also operate a very large number of services. We have many different workloads, right? Like if you think about things as a Honeycomb user, you care about your data coming in. You care about the freshness of your data for querying. You care about the response time of querying that data. You care about you care about everything from does the homepage of Honeycomb load quickly to does my query execute, no matter how many days of data I'm querying. If I'm querying 60 days of data, do I still get data back within 10 seconds? Right. So when you're trying to measure all of these different kinds of data flows, when you're trying to measure all of these different ranges of latency, ranging from operations should complete in less than 100 milliseconds to operations could take up to 10 seconds and still be acceptable, like you kind of have to have different SLOs for them. But for a majority of cases, you can kind of just squish things into two buckets. Things that I expect to be fast and things that I expect to eventually complete. And that means that you really only need 2 SLOs to get started with. And coincidentally, that's the same number of SLOs that we just gave to everyone for bundled with their Honeycomb Pro subscription. So yeah, basically 1 SLO per workflow, but you can combine multiple different workflows together. And you don't need separate SLOs for latency and for success. You can kind of, with Honeycombs, the way we think about SLOs in terms of good events and bad events, an event to be good has to be both fast enough and not erroring. And like other tools where you might need 2 different time series and to kind of combine those together or to have 2 different SLOs, one for each of these time series, you can define that kind of union of must be fast enough and successful enough into that SLO.
Right. We have interesting cases about that where we expect some queries to always be fast and some of them to sometimes be slower. And in the derived column expressions of the SLOs that we have, we're able to say, like, if it's this type of query, give it more time before considering it to be unsuccessful compared to this type of query that we always expect to be fast. And so the single SLO gives us as much signal as if we had many of them, but in a single data set. And for me, that's one of the critical things is I want a good signal to noise ratio in the alerting. Like, I don't want to be alerted by 15 different things if one thing is wrong. And I don't also want to be always having an alert when things are not relevant. So having that ability to combine the criteria or multiple events in a single derived column sort of means that I can stick with as few SLOs as I can, which is my objective. Like, it can't be 0, but the fewer I have, the happier I am with this.
Awesome. So 0 plus as few as possible is what we're saying. But really, I think the focus here is you probably only need 1 per thing that matters to you, because you can capture slowness and success. Ultimately, I'm going to say, what's the new down nowadays? Down is being slow, right? And or not successful. So you're really just computing down, as far as I'm caring, because nobody wants to wait 10 seconds for something to render. Which probably leads into the next thing is what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to achieve customer happiness, right? We all want to love and be happy to use the products we use. but this is not something you measure. And I think that's
And you
kind of the
can,
gotcha.
but it's a little bit more squishy. You can send people Likert scale, how satisfied are you with Honeycomb this month, right? Like, but that isn't really immediate feedback, at least not the level that we as systems engineers think about.
Yeah. I think customer happiness is the target. You definitely want customer happiness. Fred shared this with me.
Yeah.
And my eyes went all over the place, and I came back and I said, this is actually really amazing.
Yeah, this is a table that comes from Dr. Karen Raymer's thesis, which is I want to treat the patient, not the alarm. And it comes from anesthesia. And I love that chart because I think all the metrics we have should have a structure like that. And the titles of the table is really what's interesting to me. Like there's what it is that we measure in the first column. And so, blood pressure, the pulse oximetry and stuff like that. But there's also the variable of true or greater interest, what it is that we're actually concerned with. But that might be really difficult to measure, right? Customer happiness is usually that second column. It's the thing that we care about is that people are satisfied when using the product. But the thing that we can easily measure is going to be the latency and the status code and the return value, whether it succeeds or not. But they're not always attached, and they're not necessarily the same thing, because I can have like perfect blood pressure, but have some weird cardiac output and it's badly measured. The same reason I can have a service that answers with the right status codes and really rapidly, but people don't like using. And at that point, meeting these targets is not necessarily useful, because the thing I need to keep an eye on is the variable of true or greater interest. Which is the customer satisfaction, and always keeping that around is key.
It's one of those fun things where if you went to Amazon.com and you searched for results and you got 0 results back very fast, right? Like that would technically be a success, but that's not actually meeting your needs. As our CTO Charity Major says, nines don't matter unless customers are happy. So all we're trying to do is really get closer and closer to measuring that level of customer satisfaction of our service.
This is a light bulb moment for me, seeing this as well. We always talk about, customer happiness, but how do you measure customer happiness? You can take your survey, but that's way after the fact. How do you real-time measure customer happiness? And it is a multitude of many things together that got to come and coalesce into that perfect kind of view, which says, I got what I was expecting, I got it fast, and it got me to where I needed to go. And that's really what we talk about customer happiness. And that there's kind of maybe the first part of our session is talking about, what are you measuring? And are you measuring the right things? And before we get into triage response, I'd like to take a little side trail into February. The Honeycomb 5.0x fires, the bad gateways and timeouts that we experienced at Honeycomb, and our SLOs went off. I'm going to take a couple seconds to talk about a service known as Shepherd at Honeycomb. If you're a Honeycomb customer, you may have heard us talk about this thing called Shepherd. We name all of our services after dog breeds, and Shepherd is a thing that shepherds in the data, that ingests the data into Honeycomb. It is the gateway of all our ingests. It is the highest traffic service that we get inside of Honeycomb. It also has the highest targets in terms of SLIs, or SLOs, I should say, with targets of 4.9s or even 4.95s in some cases. And it accepts JSON and gRPC. It's the thing that all the APIs, all the SDKs talk to. Last I checked, this is up and above of 60 billion events per day that we see on this endpoint. And it's our service that unfortunately did not have a wonderful time in February, as you can see here. It didn't actually trigger right here. We didn't go below 0 yet. We were about to. And I'm going to let kind of Fred take it from here to talk to us about that week in February where we were getting to 5.04s and 5.02s. And
yeah, so there's a bit of context around that one. All right, we're undergoing a migration from our EC2 instances onto EKS, so switching to Kubernetes. And you can also see that on February 4th or 3rd, there has been a reset with a little dotted line in the budget. And this is because we were having a bunch of issues with the way we were burning our budget for this endpoint in the front end, we were getting a bunch of status codes that were not successful, and we managed to solve them at that point. And we reset the SLO, saying, okay, the problem is gone. We can now track like the budget in the new world of the things we have fixed, and we accelerated the rest of the migration. And then it started burning even faster than what we had before. And you can see that we were roughly burning the entire month's budget in half a month. And so what happened with that one is that we started mustering a response about this, saying like, this isn't on fire right now, but there's a clear degradation of service we didn't have before, and we need to start looking into it. And so it started with another engineer who was on call. It became their primary task for that week. Their week ended. It started getting on my plate at that point as well. And we can probably switch to the other diagram that sort of explains what happened with this one, which is that was my understanding of how the instances were going down. We're getting too many 504 responses, I believe, and I thought, well, after a lot of looking, we figured out that it happened when underlying hosts went away and disappeared. And my understanding was that, well, whenever the mighty cloud god decides that the node must vanish, it sort of kills it, but also tells it to drain itself, and everything is taking place. And what we're finding out is that this wasn't the case. These events were not making it through in Kubernetes, whereas they were making it through in EC2 instances. And so after a lot of digging and trying to put things into place, we finally got into a better position, which is shown in the next diagram, which is that actually there's a lot of magical things that you need to have in place for this to work, where you need to put a lifecycle hook in there, and there's a magic event bridge bus thingy that they don't tell you about, but all the magic events that you need for this, in the case of Kubernetes, go there. You need to put specific event bridge rules, put up an SQSQ, which is a mouthful, and then you're running something called the AWS node termination handler that has to drain from that queue in order to be able to tell the node, hey, empty yourself, you're about to go down. And we didn't have that in place. We had no clear idea that this would be required because it wasn't visible to us. We never needed it before. And that 12, 14 days of the budget going down is the time that it took us to figure out like, hey, something's wrong. What might be wrong? How do we try to fix it? Put the fix in production and then sort of make it work and confirm that it goes through. And we had a few hiccups into there, but we were doing that the entire way through with the budget slowly burning, not necessarily alerting us until we were really close to empty budget.
Yeah, it's definitely a really interesting thing where we got into this pickle because like many cost-conscious services, we use AWS spot instances, which AWS can indeed take away from you at any moment and give you a replacement for slightly more money. But it still is a discount of like 30 or 40 or 50% off of the list prices. So it's very much worth doing. And even if we weren't doing this at the scale down at the end of the day, because you don't want to keep your instances running over the weekend that you need for peak weekday traffic, right? Like you need a mechanism to yeet instances out of your pool. And if you don't gracefully shut down, requests keep on flowing to these instances that are going away, right? And then they end up dropping on the floor until the load balancer finally rebalances everything. So very kind of subtle intersection of behavior, right? Like it's not just, we forgot to implement the thing. Sure, we forgot to implement the thing, but there's more to it, which is that this used to work. And we were doing this on purpose in order to make sure that we were able to run the service economically.
Didn't we say Kubernetes is going to solve all problems somewhere? Somebody said this? Or am I just
only if part of the problem you have is that you're looking for different types of problems.
Right. Like the reason why we, you should definitely see the webinar we did previously where Fred and Ian, I think, talked about, and Charity talked about why did we go to Kubernetes, right? Like things were working fine on EC2, except the deployment process was really fragile, right? And that's kind of why we were like, okay, we need deployment groups. We need kind of all these lifecycle things to better manage our fleet.
Yeah, it's like SLOs for me, right? I need to have a thing that manages the containers. If I could get away with none, I would use none, but we need one, and then it turned out to be Kubernetes, and it came with a few different problems to solve other ones. But that's the sort of trade-off that we constantly have to make at every step of the way.
I feel like Amazon might be adding a little bit to your Kubernetes problems here with AKS as flavors, but it's, this is kind of a day in the life of us solving and really responding to an event. And I think if we go back to what Fred just first started talking about, this was solved over the course of 2 weeks. We noticed it. We knew it was going to be a problem very soon, but not an imminent problem. It gave us time to kind of get ahead of it and allocate time for it and make it the number one priority of the engineer on call in order to deal with this. And eventually we found the issue. We're able to write a solution for it and roll that out.
Right. And compared to an incident, like when it was the end of my day, I didn't keep working after hours. It's like, okay, this is now a problem for tomorrow, and it's going to keep burning a bit at night, but not enough to be an actual alert right now. We know what's happening, but it helps time management.
Yeah.
There's a great question coming from the chat, actually, which is asking, what was the impact to users during this? We were serving higher than normal errors. Did users actually perceive a drop in their traffic?
Some did. We were having some reports for some users. We'll find that not all users have the same tolerance for errors and the quality of the service. Some of them are very, very high volume and they don't really give a crap. Whatever happens, they can just resend the traffic and it's never been a problem to them. And other ones, even if they have a bit less traffic, are going to be extremely strict about what they want and want an explanation about each kind of blip we might be having. And in some cases, it's not necessarily always clear if the thing we have to do is meet the expectations or manage the expectations, but we definitely heard from some of our customers about it because they were noticing it. They wanted to know what was going on, and some didn't care at all.
Yeah, it's this interesting thing where open telemetry, as well as kind of libhoney, our previous generation protocol, both of them have buffering and retry built in, but people are monitoring these things. And also, if you need to retry significantly more, that increases the memory footprint, right? So if you're running close to your memory footprint, you might actually run your instances out of memory if they're running the OpenTelemetry collector. So these were things that didn't necessarily result in giant, craters in our client traffic, but were definitely perceptible, right? So this is that classic definition, which we're about to get to, of a medium urgency incident, right? This was not all hands on deck, we're dropping traffic, customers are seeing craters, but it was something definitely that aligned with customers complaining to us.
You led right into it, Liz. I love that. We're talking about burn rates. We're talking about your error burn rate here in particular. And we're talking about how that drives the prioritization of what you look at. Generally speaking, we could drop them into 3 different buckets fast. This is probably an incident. Often it's solved with a rollback, or it's some kind of cloud infra happen right now problem, and it's very sudden. Medium, like the one we're talking about, you may allocate time over the next 2 or 3 days to a few weeks to address it. It's not an immediate thing. In some cases, even caused by one customer having issues. Thank you, Bubble Up, for helping us find these, by the way. And then finally, the last one here is slow. And I'm just going to leave kind of, this right here. We're going to spend time to talk about slow, what that means at Honeycomb, but here's what the burn charts would look like for each one of them. So you have a fast one there that happens quickly, medium, which is something that happens a little bit more faster, where you can see here where we effectively burn through our entire budget half the time, and slow, which is we're burning through the whole budget, but over the entire course of time. You don't want to be running a 2% budget. That's not healthy.
It doesn't leave you enough room for unexpected things if kind of at steady state you're barely even able to meet your SLOs.
Yeah. So go ahead, Fred.
I wanted to say the fast case specifically for that one, I believe, might have been a pen tester that triggered some of the alerts we had by generating a lot of errors. But we've had similar ones recently. I think there was a public incident about the home returning errors. And for us, it turned out to be a false positive where we changed some definitions and refreshing the page took it away. But the home page just refreshes every minute. And so it was tanking our results with users parked on that page. But we had the full-blown incident response, even though there was no actual impact on people, to figure that one out with the incident review and everything related to that. The slow and mediums are interesting because the slow one and medium are actually the same ones that I was talking about with the Shepherd stuff. So the slow one was the first errors we were slowly having that I said once we hit that wall at the end, we reset it and then started growing faster. Like that one was very, very careful work to try to reduce the error rate. Once we thought we had it, we reset it and it started to burn even faster. But we went from the slow to medium on that single service over the course of a month and a half. Yeah.
But I think part of this is to recognize, keep an eye on your SLOs. Don't just depend on your triggers. Your trigger will eventually go off. Your burn alert triggers, I should say, will go off if and when you reach that zero line. But if you're seeing a slow burning SLO that's going to chew through your budget over the course of a month, it's probably time to have a discussion about it.
Yeah.
An organizational discussion.
Every week we have a on-call handoff meeting, and one of the steps is let's go over the trigger that are firing right now, and let's go over the SLOs, and we take a quick look at them and seeing like, oh, those might be burning a bit faster than we thought. Put a note, I go look into it after the meeting, and then we can bring it up if there's something going on with that, even if it's not alerting right now. But there's a bit of time spent here and there looking at general health of the service by looking at them.
Yeah, this is always the most exciting part of being an SRE. I think it's not the incidents themselves, right? Like it's the conversations about what should our SLOs be? How are we working to proactively manage to those SLOs, right? Like that's kind of the best systems thinking, kind of socio-technical systems thinking aspects of the job that Fred and I do.
And that's probably what I wanted to really make sure we spend time and have people recognize is your burn rate, the way how you're going through your SLOs, or you know, your unavailability budget, we'll call it. It does dictate how you respond to them. A fast one should trigger a response, should wake people up, should get them out of bed, should hopefully provide them with the actionable tools inside of Honeycomb to get to the answer quickly. By us embedding and doing an automatic bubble up on the reason why, typically that leads you to an immediate fast way to understand the problem, roll it back. But you know, these medium, these slow burns, they still happen, and they are more around discussions. And the SLO screen is meant to be that dashboard that you could use to drive those discussions within your teams. So you're not just staring at your PagerDuty screen.
Yeah, and slow burns sometimes do require like having a broader discussion with the organization because they can be due to, you know, a new feature shipped and capacity is spread differently, and we need to shift some priorities. In some cases, it's going to be the type of users we have and the type of work they do have changed, and some of our SLOs were defined to work accidentally. Right? I mentioned earlier that some of our SLOs have fast queries and slow queries, and it's possible that their makeup changes because what a big customer switches from fast queries to slow ones, and all of a sudden your platform and your service might be faster than it was before, but your metrics are worse because they're made up differently. Then you need to have that discussion about whether this is actually acceptable, and then we can change the SLOs and the definition and adjust them to how, you know, the world shifted under our feet. Or we need to actually invest and change how we react to maintain the targets that we had established. And this isn't something that you can decide when you're on call, when you're just an SRE or something like that. It's something that you have to talk across multiple teams to sort of figure out.
Yeah, anything that relates to the definition of the SLO or that relates to the percentage target for the SLO is really a SRE to product management discussion of what is the feature of reliability. What do we think the criteria are for that? Should we be making longer term changes to architecture if we think the SLO is right? Or if we think the SLO is wrong, right? Like if it's been degraded for months, no one is complaining, then maybe the SLO is wrong.
Yeah, and there's a different input that can come, which is going to be the customer satisfaction, right? We have the variable of interest and the one on top. It's possible that through customer success or support, you're just going to hear like, customers are not happy with how this is going on, but you're not getting alerted, then that has to be taken as a signal that the SLO definition is probably not strict enough to meet the expectations of users at that point in time. So it can go both ways.
You know, thinking of Liz's description earlier on, I do a search on Amazon. If I come back with 0 results, that should probably be part of my SLO calculation. How many results per search? And if you're consistently returning 0, then that's not a successful search. We do have one of our actually in Honeycomb, and one of our SLOs is when we return back from queries is because we parallel process the queries, that none of the parallel processors return an error. Maybe all the other 27 were fine, but the 28th one failed. We need to make sure that we mark that as a failed event in our world, even though the majority of that event was serviced just properly. And when we're done talking about burning down your SLOs, probably the last topic I wanted to talk about here is, what do you do when you burned up the budget? Where you've gone below zero, what now? At Honeycomb, certain SLOs take a much larger organizational impact than others. And those that have the larger, wider organizational impact are discussed at an organization. If one of these SLOs should fail, we bring in all responsible teams. It is a cross-organizational thing. We do something described as we're loosely fitting as the SLO protocol. We're not saying you have to follow this. There's different ways to approach this. I'll let Fred go ahead and describe what the SLO protocol is at Honeycomb that we do.
Right. I'll probably start by introducing a bit of the error budget as we've seen it in the Google books about SLOs and that sort of mechanism, where what they would do for, and Liz can correct me on that one if it's wrong, but if you burn through your budget, you have to essentially slow down the amount of feature work you do and replace it with stabilization work to help with your reliability. And when the budget empties, that's a sort of reaction, right?
There's definitely this difference between what the Google SRE book says you should do versus what a variety of different Google teams do versus what people who are practicing this in the wild at smaller companies in Google do, right? Like, you can run this whole spectrum from our tooling just allows push on green as long as the SLO is green, right? Like, and the instant that the SLO goes red, then you have to manually do pushes. And it's like, I don't think that's kind of quite right. You can think about things as, we're going to let the pushes continue anyways, right? Like, we just will let the error budget burn, but we'll schedule more time in the next sprint or in the next quarter to work on reliability, right? Or you can kind of take this measure of, let's keep the builds rolling, but let's make sure that we are stopping feature work and instead having those builds contain more reliability mitigations. So there's this interesting mix. And there's also simultaneously the question of, how do you track the error budget that is fully burnt, right? In our case, we think that it's useful to just hit the reset button on the SLO and say, you know what, we're going to reset it to 100%, pretend everything in the past didn't happen, just so that we can get something going forward. But also, Fred keeps this meticulous SLO reset log. Fred, I'd like to learn, have you share more about the SLO reset log.
Yeah, essentially the SLO reset log is every time the SLO budget is low enough that we decide to reset it, because we want the alerts to keep coming if something bad is happening. I take a screen cap of the budget and everything, put that into a document with an explanation of what was going on, what we think was the reason for that, and whether we reset it because we want more alerting or something like that, or we thought something would be changing. And over the course of a year, what I end up with is a basic history of our reliability and the things that used to never burn are now burning faster, the reason why they were happening, and that sort of thing. And it's mostly useful when looking back over the course of months to figure out, it looks like this specific SLO about query performance or something fired 5 times over the last 6 months. There's probably a discussion we need to have about this. And this is what sort of led up to the protocol, the SLO protocol experiment that we're running, which is that idea that I don't necessarily care if at the end of burning the SLO, the reaction is that we stop it from alerting us because we think it's no longer relevant, we adjust the value, or we just redirect work and work super hard to bring it back. The thing I really, really care about is that we're having that prioritization discussion around departments in the company. And so that's going to be engineering, that's going to be product, but we're also inviting customer success and support to the table, because if we choose to do something like, this SLO is not a priority right now, we have bigger things to do because a lot of things might be on fire. We need to have a clear communications plan to people who might be impacted by that decision, and we want them to be at the table to be aware of that. And so for us, a whole lot of it is really, I have this analogy that as you grow a company or a product or something like that, you start usually with a footpath, and you make the thing that works right now, and then you grow as you see it used. And sometimes the footpath turns into a road and the road into a highway. and at some point you turn the highway into rail and bike path or something, but you can't necessarily upscale your architecture all at the same time, all at once for everyone. And so my expectation is that it's possible we're going to have 2 or 3 SLOs burning faster than we'd like, but we won't necessarily have all the capacity to address all of them at the same time. And so the question is, which is the bigger fire we want to treat right now? How do we prioritize that? And are we okay with not paging us as strongly if we don't have the time to tackle everything at once, right? We don't want to burn out the team. And so the budget becomes that conversation starter that acts as a big feedback loop in the organization where we choose, like, what is the effort we expect of people? What are the priorities we want from product? How do we tell that about customers? And how do we make sure that this happens? It isn't only one way from the organization, and then the operators suffering on call with no means of improving their situation. So we want that full loop to be complete.
Cool. I think that that is a really excellent summation of how we think about managing to SLOs at Honeycomb and how you might be able to apply some of those lessons in your own organization. You know, you don't have to have all these processes built up when you first adopt SLOs, but I think these are useful ways to take the conversation if you find that you're not meeting your SLOs.
One thing that Fred mentioned here that I want to really echo and make sure people understand is that SLOs are great for helping you get ahead and knowing where to prioritize, where to put your effort on. SLOs are also really good from keeping your team from burning out, from working on the things that you shouldn't be working on as well. And that's really part of this whole social technical thing that we talk about, that we want people to really understand is we want to always be building new features. We always want to be releasing new features. And yes, we get it, but we're burning ourselves out when we're doing this. And we want to help people prioritize and know where to focus their efforts on. SLOs really help you do that without burning everybody out and triggering on every single potential bad mistake that could happen.
Yeah, some SLOs are more important than others, right? Like if push comes to shove, I'm solving an ingest related SLO before I'm solving a querying related SLO, right? Like we only get one chance to get that right. And we really have to make sure that that ingest is correct. So the other aspect to this is, as Fred was mentioning, right? Like we don't necessarily page on everything. Some of the SLOs are more kind of tracking long-term behavior because human attention is precious and we don't want to burn out our people.
Yeah, it's one of the key factors is that there's always more signal than attention available. Always keep in mind that people on call or answering for an incident have even more limited attention than when they are at rest. And so a lot of it is how do we make sure that their full attention can be given to critical things right now. And you lower the amount of false positive alerts by having the proper budget for your SLOs. And then there's a response required for that. There's a question right now that I'd like to probably look at quickly. I'm part of this. Is the part of the system that is being treated the team that is supporting those systems? I think that yes, that's a social technical aspect. The technical component and the human component are intrinsically tied together. If tomorrow the entire company goes on vacation for a week without a pager, I'm pretty sure the company is just going to shut down. So for me, there's as much care that's required in making sure that the on-call experience and the overall engineering experience and the support, the CS and the product experience is good, is as important as getting the actual technical quality in place. Neither is sufficient, but both are necessary. I think you're muted right now, Pierre.
Yeah, sorry, as we're answering questions, certainly QR scan this thing in. You'll get yourself a t-shirt, I test and prod. If you are a Honeycomb user, we certainly hope you test and prod. If not, we hope you test and prod anyways, and certainly go get this. And so you just need to fill out a quick survey. We'll be closing that tomorrow at around noon Pacific time, and password is set up for success, but please go ahead and get yourself a free t-shirt. And with that, We will also be taking any further questions people have. I know we've been trying to answer some of them as they go. I'm going to kind of scroll back through this chat here as well to try to find a couple that we may have missed by accident. There's a question here, it may be a statement. Do we continue to tweak our error budgets as we prioritize which fires to fight? There are times we may adjust our SLI calculations associated with our SLOs based on perhaps changes to the platform. I don't think it's based on fires fighting. It is more based on our changes to the platform, our feedback from our users about what's keeping them happy and what's not keeping them happy. And we'll make the adjustments based on that, but it's certainly not based on we're fighting a lot of fires, we need to adjust our SLI accordingly. That target was set for a reason.
Yeah, in some cases, we might decide to let some of them burn. We've done it with our internal build times where we had a target of this many minutes for each build to be, built, tested, and merged. And for maybe a month and a half, we changed how we were generating a lot of code, and we were slower than required. We just, don't want to be alerted all the time. We know the problem is there. It's us suffering from it. And we just decided to let it burn until we had the time to do it, because that was a pure engineering decision at that point. And without changing the criteria, once it was done, we reset it and we started having it again. There's been some cases where we had an SLO that was on the slow burn mode before we had properly or better established SLO protocol approach of just saying like, oh, it's burning, but there's nothing to do on call. Let's just reset it. And that was overlooking with the SLO reset log that I sort of noticed, okay, now people are being annoyed with this being on call. I'm just going to relax it and trigger the discussion. But it was relaxed first because I wanted to stop paging people for things they could not fix while on call. Sometimes it happens, but it's pretty rare.
We got a question here from Jean-Marc Wright. Could you talk about how we deal with the medium burn issues in terms of alerting? Do these go to Slack? I think we talked a little bit about Fred, but maybe you can repeat how we dealt with that medium burn issue that we've seen going on.
Right. Well, most of our SLOs are set on a 30-day window. You can set them to something shorter if you think it helps have these organizational conversations, right? If you're planning every week, then having a week-long SLO might be a decent idea. We do it on a monthly basis, and each of them has multiple burn alerts. Usually our standard is sort of 24-hour burn, just post it to Slack. We have a day to figure out what might be going on. 4 hours or 1 hour, page someone because it's going to empty its budget soon enough.
Wait a second, Fred. I think we actually haven't talked about this quite yet as far as how does Honeycomb compute error budget burn. When we talk about a 24-hour burn, what that means is in the next 24 hours, if nothing changes in the past 6 or so hours of behavior continue to hold for the next 24, that you are going to, from the combination of your previous burn over the past 29 days and the expected burn for the next 24 hours, that you're going to have blown your SLO. Right, so that's what we mean by a prediction that you're going to burn your error budget in 24 hours. Similarly, if we predict you're going to burn your error budget in 4 hours, what's happening under the hood is we're looking at the most recent hour of data and projecting that forward 4 hours and saying, what happens if we have 4 more hours like the most recent hour that we had? Does that result in blowing your error budget? So that's how we deal both with that scenario of temporary blips and kind of longer term tracking, is we're not just looking at the most recent 5-minute window, right, to raise alarms. We're looking at this kind of longer historical pattern plus sufficient data from the past couple of hours that you're not going to spuriously trigger just because you had 1 out of 1 bad request in the middle of the night. That's taken in context with your past 29 days of data.
Yeah, and so these messages, the thing we do is that, the lesser the budget left or the more aggressive the alert, then the noisier it is. And we have the slowest ones that way. And some of our SLOs are actually not paging anyone. They're going to a channel called signals. And those are just health things that we've decided we're not going to page about that, but we want to know about it going on if you're willing to know about it. So those all have different burn alerts with different levels of aggressiveness to deal with that. And so that's sort of how we deal with that sort of triage. It's the more urgent, the more attention it requires, and we willingly don't disrupt people as much for things that are not burning as much.
Yeah. So as you can imagine, if we start failing like 100% of the requests, and like it's more than just one bad request, that's going to result in the 4-hour exhaustion alert going off. That's going to result in a page. But if it's more of an SLO sustainability issue, either that gets caught at the weekly review, or it gets caught by one of those "you're going to exhaust in 24 or 48 hours" alerts.
Yeah.
So yeah, importance, triage. Like these are all important. These are all useful things because importance can vary.
Yeah, I like to think that from the point of view of being paged, the user workflow is not one where someone opens the page, logs in, puts in a query, looks around the boards or something like that. My user workflow starts with, you have been interrupted by the SLO. Now what? And that's going to be for the fast burn. And possibly the medium burn is you've seen the notification in Slack and it has some context. Now what? And if it's the slow burn or something, it's probably we're just browsing the page and found something. And all of these have that sort of different user flow in my mind, and they talk to different people in different contexts. And whenever we write a description, pick an alert or something like that, that's the sort of model I have in my mind of what is this person doing when they hear about it. And who are they going to talk about it to, and what's the expected reaction? So 4-hour burn, it's the person being paged by PagerDuty, grabbing their laptop at any time. If it's something that's much, much longer, it's going through a channel where I assume that they're seeing it because they're in a more relaxed state of mind and they're able to make decisions at that point and open a ticket on that behalf, and I don't have to care about that from the alert. The person seeing it with the amount of attention I'm requiring will make that decision. And so far, it seems to work great.
As we've been saying this whole webinar, like SLOs are a socio-technical concept, right? Like it's not just the burn alert, it's the kind of process machinery that's in place in your organization.
Yeah. I mean, you could imagine an organization that is extremely ticket driven with priorities, and the thing you would want to do is use a webhook to open the tickets to the right priorities, as that's the way you're organizing your work. But that depends on your organization.
I wanted to take on another kind of couple questions here about aggregating multiple different endpoints into a single SLO. I first want to say, if all your endpoints happen to have the same customer happiness target, meaning the same number of response rates and the same kind of duration behaviors, or I should say target, like we're looking for 4 nines over 30 days, you can combine them into a single SLO using a bigger if derived column, where you say, if endpoint is X, then I want duration to be Y. If endpoint is A, then I want duration to be B, so on and so forth, as your SLO or your SLI's calculation. That can be done in Honeycomb. It can lead to a complicated SLO, especially if you have a lot of endpoints in there. And I will also kind of say is, you need to make sure these endpoints all have the same target. If they have different targets, then you need to make them as separate SLOs, clearly, because an SLO can only have one target.
Yes, we do need to differentiate a SLO target versus an SLI threshold, right?
Yes.
When we're talking about the expected response latency, that is the threshold. So yes, Honeycomb's derived column language, which you use for SLOs, is immensely flexible to a point, right? Like I think the challenge is if you have multiple different endpoints that one team is responsible for and is managing to a single SLO, great. Combine them together or the different conditions together, you'll be fine. But when you have multiple different teams involved, you really want each team to get alerted based off of its own SLOs, right? And we don't do that kind of conditional SLO routing. Like you get one notification if the entire SLO is burning. So that's kind of why we think it's the right decision to give everyone access to Honeycomb SLOs if they're a pro customer, right? Because 2 services seems like or 2 teams seems like a reasonable kind of chunk for a pro team to interact with.
Okay, do we have any other questions?
I think there was a question I saw earlier about what does the conversation with the business unit look like when you need to change your when you need to have the conversation about reliability as a product feature. Fred.
I mean, the thing you first need is to have an agreement and an expectation that this can be discussed. Right? If you are in there and the overall flow in the organization is that, I don't know, product or some other department decides something goes and you just have to do it and there's no discussion back, then your experience with an SLO is not necessarily going to be great because you still have very few opportunities to influence what happens with the information you gain from the SLO. Right? You might be getting less noise in your alerts, but there's no great way to feed that information back to the to the organization to influence that. From the moment we have that sort of shared concern that, hey, part of building a good product is to have it be reliable, and we have that agreement, then the discussion is sort of easy. Like, here's the signal we have. Here's how it's impacting us right now in engineering. What can we do about that? There's not necessarily a ton of options, right? There's going to be about reprioritizing, lowering the alerting, or some kind of in-between compromise. And then the question is, how do we communicate that? A lot of the discussions boil down to that sort of thing. It's on fire. Is this a fire we want to fight? If so, yes, and how hard? And to me, there's a part where for engineering and the people on call, there's the advocacy that's required of saying, like, I don't want to burn out people doing this. And it has to be, I don't want to say balanced, but compromised with the idea of we want to keep all the customers happy. And you might find yourself in a situation where both are in direct conflict. You need to work extra hours to deal with that. Generally an incident. If it's not an ongoing incident, then we have to be having the ability to have these discussions about these moving goalposts. We choose them because we think they represent customer happiness. And we have to act with the means that we have. And a lot of these discussions for me are about making sure that we're currently properly evaluating the means we have and the priorities that we have. And this is essentially what it is. It's a priorities discussion. So it's easy if your people care about, not burning out employees and they care about reliability and stuff like that. I don't know how to bring these discussions to the table if some or many or one of the parties doesn't care.
Okay, I think that's it for questions. I am going to drop one more link here in GitHub to accompany Blake's link that he dropped. Blake, thanks for dropping that link about Sickles or Michael Sickles' GitHub repo with some SLI definitions in there. We have been working to promote some of those, if you will, to another repo within Honeycomb itself, the Honeycomb resource samples repo. This is going to be a collection of good SLIs that cover a lot of different groundwork, as well as other resources for Honeycomb, like dashboards and so on. So definitely you want to kind of maybe check that out, if you will. And it also has Sickles' derived column VS Code extension. With all that being said, thank you everybody for attending this session. We really appreciate it. We do have some upcoming events coming up. One in particular, I think it's next week or the week after. It's a hands-on instrumentation workshop, or an advanced instrumentation workshop, I should say. This is done, Sickles will be on this one, I believe. And in fact, you should go watch him. He's going to deliver a great session on how to instrument and do advanced instrumentation techniques using Honeycomb or using OpenTelemetry. And if you're just getting started with this, we actually have the introduction version. So the advanced one's going to happen first because we already did the intro one not long ago, but we're going to be doing another intro one on May 18th. Liz, I believe, may be part of this. And this is about getting started and sending data into Honeycomb using OpenTelemetry. Great events. I recommend everybody to join these if you're want to learn more about OpenTelemetry. Definitely want to go check those out. And with all that being said, thank you everyone for this hour. Please enjoy the rest of your week. We really appreciate it all. Let us know how we did on that survey. And again, thank you one more time.